Because of why I search the deep through endless nights, no time to sleep. The call inside I can't deny. I'll find the light because of why.
Hey everyone, and welcome. So, have you ever just looked at a map, seen how unbelievably close the Bahamas are to Florida? I mean, they're just 50 miles off the coast, and thought, wait, why aren't they a U.S. state, or at least a territory like Puerto Rico? It's such a good question, and trust me, the answer is a fascinating story that goes all the way back to the American Revolution.
And here's the real kicker. It was this close to being part of the United States. In the very first days of the country, one of the most famous founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin himself, actually put it in writing. He proposed that, as part of the peace deal, Britain should just hand over the Bahamas. Yep, it was right there on the negotiating table. So that's the big mystery we're going to unravel today. If America's leaders wanted the Bahamas, and it was so incredibly close, what stopped it? What happened that pulled these two neighbors onto completely different paths for good?
Okay, so to get what happened, we've got to rewind the clock to what the Bahamas were like before the Revolution. At the time, they were a British colony, sure, but they were pretty sparse, not doing great economically. But they weren't isolated at all. In fact, they were deeply, and I mean deeply, connected to the American mainland.
The really key thing here is just how dependent these islands were. I mean, their entire existence pretty much revolved around trade with colonies like South Carolina and Georgia. They literally needed American food to survive. And on top of that, they were a super convenient hub for all kinds of business. Legal trade, and of course, a ton of smuggling and piracy. Britain, for its part, barely gave them a second thought and left the islands almost totally undefended.
And that lack of defense? Well, it became a huge problem for Britain, because when the American Revolution kicked off, it didn't just happen near the Bahamas. Oh no, it arrived right on their doorstep with cannons.
That's right, the very first amphibious landing in the entire history of the United States Marines happened in Nassau. A brand new American fleet sailed south with one crucial goal: to get their hands on the massive stockpile of gunpowder stored in the city's forts. George Washington's army was desperately low on ammo, and the Bahamas just looked like a really easy target. So the Americans invaded, and leaders like Franklin were clearly interested in the islands. But the real turning point, the thing that decided the Bahamas' fate, wasn't a single battle. It was the outcome of the entire war.
This number, right here, this number changes everything. After America won its independence, about 7,300 people flooded into the Bahamas as refugees. For a place with such a tiny population back then, this was an absolutely massive wave of people. So, who were they? They were American Loyalists, colonists from places like New York, Georgia, and the Carolinas who had sided with the British. They lost the war, they lost their property, and they were forced to get out. They needed a new home under the British flag, and the Bahamas was one of the closest and easiest options.
This flood of refugees completely remade the islands from the ground up. They brought with them thousands of enslaved people, which more than doubled the black population. They kickstarted a whole new cotton plantation economy. But, and this is the most important part, they created a powerful new political class, whose entire identity was built on being loyal to Britain and fundamentally against the brand new United States. The Bahamas basically became a loyalist stronghold.
And with this new, fiercely pro-British identity locked in, any chance of the Bahamas joining the U.S. just evaporated. From that moment on, the islands were set on a completely different path within the British Empire, a path that would split away from America's for almost 2 whole centuries.
And this timeline really lays out just how different those journeys were. The U.S. becomes a nation in 1783. The Bahamas, meanwhile, stays a British colony, sees slavery abolished empire-wide in 1834, and only becomes a fully independent nation in 1973. That is a 190-year difference.
But here's the thing about geography. You can't deny it. So even though their political paths went in opposite directions, over the next 200 years, the Bahamian economy started this slow, steady pivot, away from London and towards the economic superpower just 50 miles away.
A perfect example of this is their money. For most of its history, the Bahamas had what was called a currency board, which was pretty standard for British colonies. It kept their currency tied directly to the British pound. But after independence, they set up a modern central bank. This gave them the power to officially peg the Bahamian dollar 1-to-1 with the US dollar. Basically, they chose to anchor their economy to America, not Britain.
And that brings us to today, and to the really fascinating paradox that defines the whole relationship between the US and the Bahamas. Two nations that were set on completely different courses, all because of the American Revolution.
So this is the reality of it now. Politically, the Bahamas is a proud, independent nation, a member of the Commonwealth. But economically, it's deeply, deeply tied to the United States. Its currency is locked to the dollar, and its economy is dominated by American tourism and finance.
So in the end, we're left with this history that was forged by a revolution that created one nation and totally redefined another through the people it displaced. It leaves us with this incredible question. How can two countries be so close, so inseparable in some ways, and yet politically remain worlds apart?
If you found this dive into history as interesting as I did, do us a huge favor and hit that like button, share this with someone you think would find it cool, and definitely subscribe for more explainers just like this. We would love to hear your thoughts on this whole unique relationship down in the comments below.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you on the next one.